Right, let's get going. Can everyone hear me at the back okay? Yeah, awesome, thank you. So, has anyone seen this map before? This map that I've had up there for the last couple of minutes. No one's seen this? This is a, this is a map from 1940, and a friend of mine and I were, a friend of mine showed me this map, and he said, this is really, really interesting. So this was a map from the war, the Second World War. And what it's showing is the southwest coast of the British Isles there, and the north coast of France. And this was actually a strategic map, a strategy map. This was intended for, the strategy was intended for Germany invading the British Isles in about 1940 or 1941. And it was known as Operation Sea Lion. And what it shows here is that we've got a bunch of infantry divisions there in northern France. They pretty much wiped out the Allies in France, and they were getting ready to jump over to Britain and take over. And it's all part of their kind of higher level strategy to control Europe. So what this is showing is a bunch of divisions that were getting ready to jump on a ship and go over and make landfall here in Britain, and then kind of make their way through Britain and up to, I assume, London. Now, the interesting thing about this map was that it was found after the war, and it's now in the Imperial War Museum, and it was sketched by, I'm assuming, a German military person of some sort, because they've put some ships with like steam coming out. This is like where the troops are going to be going across the channel, and they've got this little like paratrooper parachuting in, a commando parachuting in. So it's really quite interesting. Now, this is kind of one part of their strategy. The overall strategy, as I said, was to invade Britain to gain control of Europe. But they knew that if they played this strategy, they were going to be in trouble, because if they put all their troops onto ships and floated them across the channel, they were going to be taken out by the RAF, from the air. They were going to be blown to pieces from the air. So what preceded this strategy was another strategy, which was actually to fly across the British Isles and bomb key targets within Britain. So they started with ports, and then they moved on to key industry, and then they moved on to the air bases and airfields themselves. So that was the strategy that was the precursor to this. And of course, when Germany flew over Britain, they were unprepared for the dominance of the RAF. They were unprepared for the strength of the RAF. So the targets that they were hoping to destroy were not destroyed, because they were overrun in the air. And that was called the Battle of Britain, and that was in 1940. So because they couldn't dominate in the way they thought they could, it was too risky to put their troops on ships and go across the channel, so they decided to pivot their strategy. And actually, as a result of the Battle of Britain, Germany decided to invade Russia instead. And I mean, that was a different story. But the point is, this strategic map, this strategic plan, didn't happen like that. So when my friend and I, Hopi, the map butcher, were talking about this, we were kind of relating it to business and business strategy. And we were kind of saying there's a few things going on here that we don't see in the execution of business strategy. Firstly, there's a number of levels of strategy at play here. This is just kind of one that was part of a series of higher order strategies and lower order strategies as well. So these guys would have had their own kind of micro level strategies on what they were going to do when they made landfall in the US, in the UK. You know, it's objective based in that they had a clear objective of what they wanted to do, but you know, like it's an uncertain environment. Like, there's a lot of volatility and complexity here. There's a lot of things that could change and could go wrong. And I guess the big point is that plan didn't eventuate. But when we thought about this from a business context, we said actually business operates differently to that. Often we see business strategy as this kind of higher order thing. And that's kind of where it sits, a higher order strategy, almost like one-dimensional. And this felt a little bit different to this version of the strategy that we saw. So that conversation prompted this particular talk, which is around strategic agility. And so this talk's in two parts. The first part is I'm going to dive into what we mean by strategy, and in particular what we mean by being agile about the way we execute on strategy, and why businesses need to think this way. And then the second part of the talk is I'm going to introduce a framework, which is one that I've been partnering with one of my clients on, around how they can execute their strategic imperatives in a bit more of an agile way. And I'll give you some tips and tricks and considerations around what you might do if you want to do that within your own organisation. This term strategic agility was coined by this guy, Steve Denning. He actually wrote a book in 2017 called The Age of Agile. And he said this quote, and I'll paraphrase it, but he was basically saying that a lot of the agile transformation work that we've done in the past have been focused on operational agility. Whereas the next frontier for our work is around helping businesses be understand how they can be more agile about the way they do their strategy. What I took from this when I first read it was this is a bit like the stuff that Drucker was talking about in the 60s and 70s when he was talking about efficiency and effectiveness. Efficiency about doing things well and effectiveness at doing the right things. And certainly in my experience in doing agile transformations, most of the focus has been on efficiency. It's been on operational, like removing waste and being quicker to market and being more efficient and productive about the way we do stuff. But that really hadn't flown up to the business as a whole. So I'll come back to Denning a little bit later, but to start this, I'm going to ground this on actually what we mean by this stuff. So let's actually have a look at why strategic agility should be a business imperative for everyone. So first, let's have a look at some definitions. So I always like to go back to the dictionary definition. So when I thought about strategy, and I've worked in a lot of organisations, and I've thought to myself, what is strategy? And actually, when I thought about it, I actually found it quite difficult to define. So here's dictionary.com's version, and there's kind of 4 parts to that definition. Like science and combining science and art. The use or an instance of using this science or art, this wasn't really hitting home to me. Number 4 looks pretty good, a plan, a method or a series of manoeuvres for obtaining a specific goal or result. So kind of kind of felt quite good to me, a goal focused and a kind of way to meet that goal. Then if you look at what Wikipedia says, interestingly again there's kind of a military theme to this, but again it talks about high-level goals. This one introduces the concept of uncertainty. So, okay, if we're doing something strategic, it's about meeting goals, but we've got to navigate some sort of uncertainty. So this, as kind of an agile guy, this was kind of feeling good to me. Then I searched for business strategy, and this is where things got really confusing for me. So when you search business strategy on Google, there are thousands of definitions of what business strategy is, thousands. Lots of famous writers describing business strategy in very, very different ways. And I can only think that that's because these guys made a lot of money out of writing books, so they had to write something differently about what business strategy was. But Mintzberg, he's good. And he came up with like a simple definition. Strategy is a pattern in a stream of decisions, right? So he's talking about patterns and he's talking about decisions. I actually picked that up from his work on strategy that he calls the 5 Ps, and there they are there: plan, ploy, pattern, position, perspective. I kind of look at those and go, if I think back to that first military map that I saw, you can kind of see those sort of things playing out. But actually, if you read the definitions of that in Mintzberg's work, it's kind of loose and it's kind of a bit fluffy. But this is all right, okay. But the challenge for me, I guess, is when I am in an organisation and I hear things like, I don't understand the strategy, then how can we get better at doing that when we can't even agree as a community what business strategy actually means? But does it matter? So this was a picture I took at a client I was working at, which was when the CEO was talking about the annual strategy. So that he was talking to the business as a whole, and he came out with it wasn't chipped into a stone tablet. It was laminated, right, which is the modern. But you know, the point is that this is really common. That you know, annually we do some budgeting and we decide what we want to do as a business, as a strategy. And here is our strategy. I'm going to laminate it and I'm going to put it on the wall. And like I said, you often that's one problem. The other problem is that sometimes you hear this: people saying, "I don't know what the strategy is." If you talk to that CEO, the CEO will tell you, "I don't understand why people don't understand the strategy because I talk about the strategy all the time." Right? This is a really common thing. But the problem is the CEO is talking about that strategy at such a high level that it actually doesn't mean much to the people that are on the ground. They haven't done a very good job at saying the work that I do relates to this high order strategy. The chain gets broken at some point. So I started to dive down a little bit into some of the authors that I like to read, and this is a quote from Simon Wardley, and I'm a huge Simon Wardley fan. So if you haven't read any of Wardley's work, you should, because he's awesome, because he's totally honest and upfront, and he asks the questions that we're all afraid to ask, but we think it would look unprofessional if we ask them. So in this particular blog, Wardley's talking about his misunderstanding of strategy. So when he was a CEO, and he's quite open about saying he was a terrible CEO, he said that when he was trying to work out how to define the strategy for his organisation, he said the way he did it was he looked at other businesses' strategies and just copied them and changed and did a find and replace on the words, because he didn't know what to do. So then he started reading management books about it, and the management books were all focusing on the why. You know, we've heard these guys go about the why. You know, the why are we doing this thing? And the strategy definitions were applying to that kind of higher order. But what Wardley said was, that's all well and good, but when I'm going about my daily business and I decide to do something, well, that's a strategic decision I'm making. I'm making a strategic decision around the way I move. And the example that Wardley talks about here is around chess. So your strategy, your higher order purpose around chess is to capture the king. You've got to maneuver your pieces to stop the king being able to move. But of course, in order to do that, you form your own strategy. So you might decide that I'm going to play a defensive strategy, and I'm going to wait for my opponent to come to me, and then I'm going to change my strategy to be more offensive. But of course, that strategy itself needs to be dynamic, because you don't know what your opponent's going to do. So your opponent might also have a defensive strategy, which might mean that you need to pivot on your strategy. So I really like this, that strategy is really less about the why of purpose and more about the why of movement. Why should we as a business do this over that? And then I had the good fortune of meeting Dave Snowden a couple of months ago here in Melbourne. And he's like, has anyone met him? He's scary. He really is, because he's super smart. He's absolutely, he's a genius. And he said some really, really great stuff, but this was the one that I picked up on. He said this in the conference I was on. I haven't seen it written down anywhere. He said strategy is fractal, real-time, and evolutionary. So let's unpack that for a second. So evolutionary, you kind of go, all right, well, I know strategy is evolutionary, because we're evolving, and the landscape and the competitive environment is changing, so we need to evolve. But then he said strategy is fractal, and like I know that there's kind of those fractal, those fractal patterns that you see. I had to look it up, but fractal means similar patterns that recur at progressively smaller scale. So what he's saying is it's about that higher order strategy, and then it being broken down into progressively smaller scales. But the real thing that he said here is real time. Strategy is real time. So the CEO we had before talking about the annual strategy, how many times have you gone into a meeting that's talked about the 5-year strategy? Well, Snowden here is talking about strategy being real time. So this was the kind of fundamental. This was a bit of an epiphany for me. So all my understanding of strategy were kind of blown apart with what Wardley and Snowden were saying. But the question to you is, when is strategy not strategy anymore? So, you know, strategy kind of is always referred to often as a thing, a kind of this higher order thing. But let's think about it from a sports context for a second. So here's the Gold Coast Suns, and I think these guys, they're at three-quarter time. And they've huddled, and they're probably talking about their gameplay for the final quarter. So something's happened during the game to make them, there's some angst on their faces, things aren't going too well, we need to change the way we're strategizing about this. They probably came into the game with a strategy, knowing who their opponents were, and they probably adjusted that as they've gone along. So there's probably a higher order strategy, and there's kind of that localized strategy going on during the game. But when is strategy not strategy? So strategy, I think, is going on all the time. So, you know, as an example, you came to LAST today, and you looked at the schedule, and Craig said it's going to start at 8:45, and you think, right, okay, so how am I going to get there? I think I'll take public transport because I'm going to have a few beers after work. And so what train do I need to get? Oh, the train might be delayed or it might be cancelled, so I need to, you know, create a contingency to get there on time. And like, you're strategizing, right? You're strategizing about how you will meet your objective, which is to arrive at LAST on time. So my hypothesis is that strategy is everywhere and all the time. So if somebody says we're only thinking about this kind of long-term strategy, like, think again. We need to be strategizing all the time. So let's kind of lock in what we've talked about so far. So based on what I've just shown you, we know that strategy is objective-based. We're doing it because we want to achieve some sort of objective. We've talked that it's in an uncertain environment, that it's about movement. Why should I do this over that? Mintzberg's works on patterns, that it needs to be fluid because it's evolving and it's everywhere all the time. So, okay. Might not be the best definition in the world, but it kind of encapsulates, when I kind of think about that loose definition of strategy, this is what I think about. But my assertion is that on the whole, the majority of businesses do not execute strategy in a way that aligns to this. And I think it's time for change. And that's why I think Denning introduced this term, strategic agility. But so what? Right, really? Is it that important? Well, it is important, because McKinsey tells us it's important. So even McKinsey is telling us this, right? We're in a constantly evolving environment, and we don't know what the future's going to hold, right? We do not know. And what McKinsey says is the best way is to succeed is to embrace uncertainty and be the quickest and most productive in trying new things. Actually, what they're saying there is the organisations that will be successful in the future are the ones that are operating their strategic cycle in a way that maximises their learnings through feedback. And it's a problem in this world because of this term VUCA. Like, this thing's been bandied around a little bit. You heard of this? VUCA? Yeah, VUCA. It's a description of the world. It's something that came out of the Cold War, actually, the end of the Cold War, to say that the world now is volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, and it's ambiguous. And actually, from everything we've heard today, especially in the keynotes, the world is only becoming ever more VUCA. So if we do not embrace that and be more agile about the way that we execute on our strategy, we're going to be in trouble as a business. So this kind of brings us back to Denning's original quote. So, hopefully you kind of, that's like my little journey as to understanding what Denning meant by strategic agility. And it's my view that if businesses don't embrace thinking about their agility cycle in an agile way, they're at risk. Okay, cool. So that's kind of part one. So part two is, all right, that's good. We kind of buy into that. We buy into the fact that we want to be more agile about our strategy, but how do you do that? So what I want to introduce you to now in the second part of the talk is a framework that I worked with one of my clients who had already recognized that they needed to do this stuff better. So there's a little bit of context. It's a great organization. fantastic delivery, agile delivery organization, very, very, very strong at getting products to market, short feedback loops and learning and so on. Very strong from a delivery perspective. And this company had made a lot of money with their core products over the years. But what they're smart enough to know is that the revenue that's being generated from those core products over the next 3 years is going to start to decline. So actually they need to get better at knowing that their strategic bets are going to pay off as early as possible. So the work that we were doing with them was introducing a framework to do just that. When we were looking at how we would form this framework, of course, I go straight to Wardley again, and he said some really interesting things here about strategy. He says strategy is a continuous cycle, and the second quote there, that the process of strategy is not linear, but an iterative cycle, so similar comments. So this feeds into what we were hearing today about your mate Mick, about learning as quickly as possible, and this is kind of what we modelled the framework on. So we used some inspiration from these feedback loops. So you know, hopefully you've heard of Deming because he kind of underpins everything that we're doing these days, and a little bit around Boyd and OODA loop. What Deming said around his continuous improvement cycle was that it's about spirals of increasing knowledge. And in OODA loop, Boyd said that all human competition from chess to soccer to business involves a continuous cycle. So we looked at inspiration from PDCA and OODA. This is what we came up with. It's pretty basic, right? But it's a feedback loop. It's a plan, do, observe, decide, act feedback loop. Now, this is really high level, but it's meant to be. It's meant to be that way on purpose, because when I'm working with transforming organizations, I like to have a simple model to kind of ground everything against. So that if we're working on something, we can clearly see, okay, this is within the plan cycle or the observe cycle. So this is the first model that we put together. And then we started to work through some of those. So as its name suggests, we've got a strategic plan about what we want to do, and then we will execute around that plan, and then we'll observe what's happened. We'll be observing the external world. Some of the change in the external world will be because of what we've just done as an organisation, but other aspects of change will have been based on our competitors. And then based on that, we'll decide whether we need to pivot or change our strategic direction, and if we do, there's a phase to act on that. So what I'm going to talk you through now for the rest of the talk is the 10 steps. It's not really 10 steps, it's kind of like considerations, things that you should consider as if your organisation is embarking on a journey towards strategic agility. So we're going to start over in the plan phase. So the first one is around horizons. So it is very important to understand your strategy across the 3 horizons. So this 3 horizon model is I don't know who authored it, but McKinsey kind of picked it up and said it's now our model. But it's, but if you're a Gartner guy, it's like a run, grow, transform you may have heard of as well. But what this basically says is Horizon 1 work is like our current revenue drivers. It's where we're making our money right now. So it's our existing markets using our existing products or existing technology or capabilities. And then Horizon 2 is about our growth business, is what we're doing next. It's where we're going to make our money in the near future. So it's still probably within our existing markets, but it will also be about some emerging markets as well, really leveraging our existing capabilities. And then Horizon 3 is around how might we enter new markets with new capabilities that potentially we don't know about yet. So I think was it Christine this morning? Caroline? Christine talked about this. You remember when she talked about the crazy ideas? That's the Horizon 3 stuff. That's up there. So you might have seen this model before. You might have seen it in like this kind of 3 waves. You've seen that one? I don't use that one because I think it's quite confusing, because it kind of says we do some Horizon 1 stuff now, and next we're going to do some Horizon 2 stuff, and then we're going to do some Horizon 3 stuff. But what this is saying is actually these are value horizons. This is about when we're going to generate value. So we're going to generate value next with Horizon 2 stuff that we are working on now. So that's really the common misconception about the Horizon model is we are doing work for Horizon 3 right now. Okay? Christine used 70-20-10. I'm changing it up to 60-30-10. So what that says is the majority of our work we spend in Horizon 1 stuff. So we invest most of our time in our core business. But we should be looking at a significant amount of time in our future business. But that's work we're doing right now. The interesting thing about this is if you survey a lot of organizations and ask them to break this down for you, the first thing they say is, we don't know. We don't know where our work is, and we don't know what horizon it relates to. But even if they do know, they say something like, oh, Horizon 1's 95, Horizon 2's 5, and, well, Horizon 3 is 0. 95, 5, 0. And I've been a consultant for the last couple of years, and one of the observations I've made is that I've met a lot of people, and I've met a lot of senior people, and a lot of those senior people are really, really awesome business operators, really, really good at operating a core business. And I've always been a little bit puzzled as to why, when the conversation turns to strategy, why they're not so strong there. And I think it's because of that fact that I just talked about, that we are optimized around running an existing business, a core business. We don't spend much time working on kind of future growth strategies. The other problem with this is that even if you do know your strategy across those 3 horizons, we kind of spin up initiatives that cross all 3. And then we expect the same people to run those. But if you think about it, the people that are really good at running Horizon 1 stuff are those operational people, the ones that are very good about kind of driving efficiencies out of a core business. Horizon 2 these are kind of like the guys who are quite happy with uncertainty, and they're kind of testing and learning. And Horizon 3, they're the entrepreneurs. So when you're engaging in work across those 3 horizons, you've got to choose quite carefully who is working on that over those horizons. Number 2 is about understanding your investment. So when you look across your 3 horizons and how much time you're spending on your strategic stuff, you need to know where your money's being spent. And it's unbelievable how many times you talk to an organisation and say, can you tell me how much money you're spending on keeping the lights on? How much money you're spending on optimizing your existing core product set, and how much money you're spending on kind of like future bets or evaluating future business. And it's amazing how many times businesses can't tell you that. Now, I mean, for me, it's kind of mind-boggling that, how can we possibly make kind of future strategic decisions if we don't know where our money's being spent? I've thrown up a couple of bits from the Scaled Agile framework, which I think it does a pretty good job on this. And what it basically asks you to understand where you're spending your money across those dimensions across the left, from evaluating down to retiring. And what it says here is when you're doing your quarterly planning or your PIs and you're modelling out your value stream, you put a pie chart at the top which tells you how you're investing across that. And you can see that this is being adjusted per quarter. Most businesses aren't anywhere near being able to do this. Like they do this on an annual basis at best. And if you relate that to the horizons, you can sort of see where those things play out. The evaluating and emerging is up there in. I did get my package. Yeah. There's no other. The people who are smiling know what you're talking about. So as a man of my vintage, I have to go to the doctors every 6 months, and I have to have a health check. And the way the health check goes is I walk in and the doctor says, "Simon, how are you feeling?" And I say, "Oh, I'm tip top." And he says, "Okay, well, let's just do your vital signs." So the doctor will check my heart rate and blood pressure and listen to my lungs. And if everything's good, he says, "Great, you're all good, nothing to see here, see you in 6 months." So he's checking my indicators, my key results, if you like. And if they're in normal ranges, then that's it, I move on. But if he looks at one of those numbers and one of those, "Oh, your blood pressure's up a bit, we need to do a little bit more investigation on that. I need to send you to a specialist, so I need you to go and have a blood test." This is the health check mentality that you want to get into with your business, and it's all linked to those OKRs. So if you've got really strong OKRs and your key results, you're using those as indicators. When you have your checkpoints to see how you're performing against those indicators, if everything's good, you kind of like move on. Like you just let the teams and your business flow. So foster that health check mentality. And you do that using a lightweight checkpoint cadence. So anyone who's worked with me over the last 5 years will know that I kind of roll this out in almost every organisation. My only, so let me describe it. So it's basically a checkpoint cadence on a page. It starts at the top left at the team level or the squad level on a daily basis, right the way to the bottom right at an organisational level on an annual basis. And this is just a series of health checks that the business knows exactly what decisions it needs to make and when. And the basis for all these health checks are your OKRs. Right? So these are outcome-based decisions that we're making. Are we achieving the goals that we wanted to achieve? And how do we know that? Well, how are we progressing with our key results and our metrics? The coloured dots just represent who's there. But the annotation that we've made to this one is we've actually modelled the hierarchy of work on the right-hand side. So in this particular organisation, we've got the basic level of work as a story, which is goes up, I don't know, whatever the word is, it goes up to an epic, and then there's a number of epics make an initiative, and a number of initiatives make a strategic theme. And the reason that that's important is when you're doing your health check, you kind of look across here and go, okay, right, at the portfolio level, we should be talking about initiatives and epics. At the team level, we should really only be talking about stories. So if we're up here at the exec level and we're talking about stories, we're making the wrong decisions at the wrong level, right? So this is about encouraging the right decisions to be made by the people who have the most context to make those decisions. This is kind of a good way to model it out. Don't copy it, because this is just like an example for this organisation, but you get the gist, right? And then we move to the decide bit, and I've kind of gone, this is a total cop-out, right? Because I've kind of gone, this bit's magic. But, if you think about everything I've talked about so far, which is, we've talked about the 5 Ps, we've talked about OKRs, we've talked about strategy, competitors, we've talked about H1 pressures, so our pressure to deliver revenue for this current financial year. That's going to, mean that, we might be skewing our decisions on getting revenue over kind of future growth. But this is kind of where the execs earn their money. They need to take that stuff and make a decision on that. When I was putting this together, I thought, is there some way that I can provide a guide as to how this might work? But I honestly couldn't. If there's someone there that can help me with this, that would be good. But I honestly think that this is kind of loose and it's kind of magic. But all right, good. Thanks, Craig. And then if we do decide to make a change, the important thing is how we manage that. So how many times have you been involved with a team and a decision has been made somewhere else in the organisation to maybe change the investment from one bit of work to another, but you're still expected to kind of deliver that stuff even though you know that there's no money on that anymore. So when we make strategic pivots and/or we change our investments across that strategy, there's going to be a knock-on impact, and we need to deal with it. So there's an impact on people. People are changing teams, or potentially being moved around, or even being made redundant potentially. The nature of the work changes. Obviously, there's an impact on our customers. If we were potentially building something for a customer that we're no longer investing in, well, we need to manage that customer. Obviously, there's an impact in dollars. That's not fuck. That's just like dollars. It's like, fuck, we made a change. And then outcomes. Outcomes are really important. So when we set a series of outcomes that we want to achieve, and this outcome over here is no longer getting any investment, we can't achieve the outcome anymore. Yet most businesses don't reset those outcomes. And in fact, a lot of people are incentivized for achieving those outcomes. And then we change our investment, and how are those people how can they be expected to meet their goals if we change that? So managing change is really important. You make the decision if you're lucky, and you've got to manage change. Cool. And then the eagle-eyed people in amongst you will notice that I've only talked about 9 things. The 10 things to make it up to 10 is repeat. And my good friend Phil Gadzinski gets a quote here. And I asked Phil if I could use this quote, and he said yes. And then he said, damn, now I have to come to your talk. And he did. But Phil, read this article by Phil, it's great, and he talks about much the same stuff, and he's basically saying this process of annual planning and like 6 months to get there, it's no longer, you can no longer do it. But the question is, what should that loop be? What should that cadence be? Mick talked about this morning, because, you know, really, if you think about it, it's the lap time. What should an appropriate lap time be? And, I mean, most organisations are doing it on an annual basis. And if you're breaking it down into a quarterly basis, I mean, that's a bit better still. But if you're doing it any more frequently, may not be a good thing. But I think that lap time is dependent on your organisation, and it's dependent on your environment and so on. But as Dave Snowden says, strategy is real time. So if you're not adjusting as quickly as possible in a VUCA environment, you're in trouble. Thanks for the quote, Phil. All right, so I was going to do a kind of sense check in the room or open for questions, because I don't think we've got time for both. What would the sense check be? So the sense check is asking you guys how you stack up against these things. Actually, can I do that? I'll answer questions in the hall afterwards. All right, so how do you, so I want you to think about your environment, and I want you to think about your business. So I'm going to ask you a question. If you think we totally do that and we're awesome, you thumb up. If you're like, oh, kinda, you're here. And if you're like, we're nowhere near that, then it's thumbs down, all right? So first one, are you clear on your organisation strategy? Right, that's about a mixed bag. Yes, some yes and some no. Do you understand the impact on that strategy of the work that you are doing? So that's kind of like, yeah, okay. There's a lot of I don't knows. Yeah? Do you agree that everyone in your organisation, everyone defines strategic moves, not just the senior people? 460 people, a thumbs up. Nice. Everyone else was down. The frequency of our strategy iteration loop is about right. 100% thumbs down. Any thumbs? Oh, Dara's. Ah, you got a thumbs up. Okay, yeah, it feels good. Okay, but mostly down. It's obvious what horizon our work is sitting in. Kind of, yeah, okay, okay, that's good. That's good. There's a few thumbs. We know where, how, and why we are investing. No, lots of no's, thumbs up. Okay, yeah. You can't change like that. We have a clear organisation alignment to strategy through objectives and metrics. There's downs. Yes, down. Lots of downs. Lots of downs. We work in an iterative, feedback-driven way aligned to agile principles. Everyone should... What? That's why you're here, right? We've got clear strategic situational awareness through a visual map. No one. Oh, Phil. That's why you came. We have a health check mentality for progress. We're not overly burdened by governance. No, 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 no. Yes, yes. Sort of. Lightweight organisational cadence. Lightweight being the key. Mostly down of kind of, yeah, some. Context-based decision making. You sort of. Let's just flick to the end because we've run out of time. A belief that strategy is everywhere all the time. Oh, no, okay, good. Well, that's good because I'm a consultant, so I can help you with that stuff. Cool, we're done. Thank you very much.